With $50,000 needed for her mother's experimental cancer treatment and only 3 weeks to find it, Zara Williams finds herself serving champagne to Seoul's most dangerous elite until Kim Tae-young, the city's most feared Mafia king, notices something about her that changes everything. At 24, Zara Williams balanced silver trays of champagne with the desperate precision of someone who had calculated exactly how many events she needed to work to save her mother's life. She was an art therapy graduate from Chicago who had followed a teaching opportunity to Seoul, only to discover her mother's cancer had returned with devastating aggression. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant twist that caught the ballroom's crystal chandelier light, and her warm brown eyes held a determined strength that refused to break despite the exhaustion that shadowed her beautiful features. She needed $50,000 for an experimental treatment not covered by insurance, and she had exactly 3 weeks to find it. The charity gala at the Shilla Hotel was Seoul's most exclusive event, where a single table cost more than most people made in a year. Zara moved through the crowd of Korea's wealthiest elite, serving $1,000 champagne to men who wore watches worth more than her annual salary. The ballroom sparkled with enough crystal and gold to blind, and the women wore gowns that cost more than Zara's rent for 6 months. She had taken this catering job because it paid 3 times her teaching salary for one night's work, but every minute reminded her of the impossible gap between her world and theirs. I'm curious, are you from a big city where you see this kind of wealth disparity, or somewhere smaller where everyone knows everyone? There's something about watching people navigate these different worlds that always fascinates me. Kim Tae-young sat at the head table, a study in controlled lethality dressed in a custom black tuxedo that probably cost more than most cars. At 35, he was Korean royalty in the criminal underworld, the kind of man who controlled Seoul's shadows through a network of legitimate charities and shell corporations that cleaned his blood money into respectability. His sharp, almost aristocratic features were set in an expression of polite boredom, but his dark eyes missed nothing as they tracked the room's movements with predatory precision. He owned this hotel, funded this charity, and could destroy any person in attendance with a single phone call. But tonight he was playing the role of legitimate businessman and philanthropist. Zara first caught his attention when she gracefully deflected a drunk businessman's wandering hands, maintaining her professional composure while protecting herself with quiet dignity. She didn't cause a scene, didn't embarrass the man, simply stepped aside and continued serving with a smile that never quite reached her tired eyes. Tae-young watched as she helped an elderly woman find her medication that had fallen from her purse, as she patiently explained the evening's program to a confused guest, as she worked twice as hard as the other servers while maintaining genuine kindness. Their eyes met across the ballroom when she approached his table to refill water glasses. The connection was immediate and electric, something that made Zara's breath catch and Tae-young's controlled facade crack for just a moment. She felt the dangerous pull of attraction to this man who radiated power and barely leashed violence, while he saw something rare in her tired eyes. Strength without hardness, kindness without weakness, beauty that came from character, not just genetics. "What can I offer you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the way his intense gaze made her pulse race. "Your name," Tae-young replied, his English accented but perfect, his attention focused entirely on her face. "Zara," she said simply, professional distance maintained even as something warm unfurled in her chest. "Beautiful, like the morning star," he observed, and something in his tone made it clear this wasn't casual flirtation, but recognition. Their moment was interrupted by Kim Yun-ho, a wealthy businessman who had been pursuing Zara aggressively all evening. He appeared at Tae-young's table with a proprietary smile and 2 glasses of champagne, offering one to Zara with insistent charm. She should have refused, should have maintained professional boundaries, but Yun-ho was persistent and charming, and she was tired enough to make mistakes. "Just one toast," Yun-ho insisted, his smile never reaching his calculating eyes. "To beautiful women who work so hard." Zara accepted the glass to avoid making a scene, taking a polite sip while Tae-young watched with growing tension. The champagne tasted slightly bitter, but she assumed it was expensive vintage. Within minutes, the ballroom began to blur around the edges. Her hands trembled as she set down her tray, recognizing with growing horror that she had been drugged. The drug worked quickly, making her limbs heavy and her thoughts fuzzy. Yunho appeared at her elbow with false concern, offering to help her find somewhere quiet to rest. Through her increasing disorientation, Zara realized she was in terrible danger, that this wealthy businessman intended to take advantage of her vulnerability. She tried to refuse his help, tried to stay in public view, but her coordination was failing and Yunho was already guiding her toward the ballroom's exit with practiced ease. From across the room, Taeyong's dark eyes tracked every movement with lethal focus, recognizing predatory behavior when he saw it. The woman who had caught his attention with her grace and strength was being hunted by a man who had clearly done this before. Something cold and violent stirred in his chest, the same protective rage that had built his criminal empire on the principle that certain lines could never be crossed. The last thing Zara remembered before the darkness claimed her was stumbling toward the bathroom, desperately hoping to escape Yunho's increasingly insistent help, while the ballroom spun around her like a nightmare of crystal and gold. The world tilted dangerously as Zara pushed through the bathroom door, her legs barely supporting her weight. The drug was working faster than she had expected, turning her coordination to liquid and her thoughts to fog. She gripped the marble sink, staring at her reflection as her pupils dilated and her face grew pale. This was not champagne. This was something designed to make her compliant, helpless, easy to transport. Fear cut through the chemical haze like ice water. She had to get help. She had to stay visible. She had to fight whatever Kim Yunho had planned for her. But when she tried to leave the bathroom, Yunho was waiting outside with another man, both wearing expressions of false concern that turned predatory when they saw her condition. The hallway was empty, isolated from the ballroom's crowd, and she realized with growing horror that this had been planned meticulously. "Let me help you," Yunho said, reaching for her arm with practiced ease. "You're clearly unwell." "No," Zara managed, her voice slurring despite her determination. "I need to go back to the party." The second man moved to block her path, while Yunho's grip tightened with bruising force. She was trapped between them, the drug making her too weak to break free, too disoriented to think clearly. They were going to take her from the hotel. They were going to make her disappear. Then the hallway filled with men in dark suits who moved with military precision. Kim Taeyong appeared behind them like death in a custom tuxedo, his controlled facade completely gone, replaced by something cold and lethal that made both men freeze in terror. "Remove your hands," Taeyong said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from absolute power. "Now." Yunho released Zara instantly, stumbling backward with stammering excuses about helping a sick woman. But Taeyong's dark eyes had already catalogued the scene. The isolated location. The second man. Zara's obvious drug condition. The predatory intent written across both men's faces. "Take them," he said to his security, and the words carried finality. What happened next occurred with efficient brutality that Zara barely registered through her fading consciousness. She glimpsed Taeyong's men surrounding Yunho and his accomplice, heard sharp commands in Korean, saw the terror in their eyes as they realized who they had crossed. Then strong arms lifted her carefully, carrying her away from the confrontation with surprising gentleness. The next hours passed in fragments. The soft interior of an expensive car, elevator numbers climbing impossibly high, cool air and the scent of cedar and rain. Strong hands supporting her as she was carried through rooms that felt like luxury made manifest. Then darkness claimed her completely. Zara woke to morning sunlight filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked all of Seoul. The bed beneath her was enormous, covered in sheets that felt like liquid silk, in a room that belonged in architectural magazines. Everything was white and gold and pristine, from the custom furniture to the fresh orchids on the nightstand. Speaking of wealth, so profound it seemed almost abstract. "You're awake," said a low voice from across the room. Kim Taeyong sat in a leather chair beside the windows, still wearing his tuxedo from the night before, though his tie was gone and his shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. He looked like he had not slept, like he had spent the entire night watching over her with the focused intensity of a predator guarding something precious. There was something different about him now, something possessive and final that made her breath catch. "Where am I?" Zara asked, her voice hoarse from whatever they had given her. My penthouse. Safe, he replied, rising from the chair with fluid grace. The men who drugged you will never threaten anyone again. The way he said it made clear that Yunho and his accomplice were dead, eliminated with the kind of permanent finality that came from crossing Seoul's most dangerous man. Zara should have been horrified, should have demanded answers, but the drug was still clouding her judgment, and she felt only overwhelming relief that she was alive and unharmed. They were going to sell me, she said, the realization hitting her with delayed shock. Weren't they? Yes, Taeyun confirmed, moving closer to the bed with measured steps. To men who would have broken you in ways that death would have been mercy. But that will never happen now. Why did you save me? She whispered, unable to look away from his intense dark eyes. Because you're mine now, he said simply, the words carrying absolute conviction. Mine to protect. Mine to keep safe. Mine to ensure nothing like this ever touches you again. The possession in his voice should have terrified her, but instead it felt like the first security she had known in months. This dangerous man had risked his carefully maintained legitimate facade to save her life, had eliminated threats without hesitation, was offering protection she could never afford herself. A soft knock interrupted them, and an older Korean man entered wearing a medical coat. He moved with the deference of someone who knew exactly who Kim Taeyun was and what crossing him would cost. The examination was thorough but gentle, confirming what they already suspected. Rohypnol and ketamine, the doctor reported in accented English. Designed for trafficking. She was perhaps 2 hours from being transported when you intervened. Her system should clear completely within 24 hours. After the doctor left, Taeyun returned to his chair, studying her with those calculating dark eyes that missed nothing. She was wearing different clothes, she realized. Expensive silk pajamas that fit perfectly, her makeup removed, her hair freed from its professional twist. Someone had cared for her while she was unconscious, had treated her with respect despite her vulnerability. Your mother's medical bills, he said suddenly, startling her with the unexpected topic. Experimental cancer treatment. $50,000 needed in 3 weeks. Zara's blood ran cold. How do you know that? I make it my business to know everything about people who interest me, Taeyun replied calmly. And you interest me very much, Zara Williams. The way he said her full name made clear he knew far more than she was comfortable with, but she was too exhausted to feel anything beyond resignation. This man held power she could never match, resources she could never access, connections that could save or destroy her with equal ease. I can solve your problem, he continued, leaning forward with predatory focus. Your mother's treatment begins immediately. The best doctors, the best facilities, every expense covered. In return, you accept my protection and remain where I can ensure your safety. It wasn't really a choice, and they both knew it. She had no other options, no other salvation, no other hope of saving her mother's life. And after what had almost happened to her, she understood with crystal clarity that Seoul was far more dangerous for a woman alone than she had ever imagined. What exactly are you asking me to be? She said quietly. Mine, he repeated, and this time the word carried promise as much as possession. Under my protection, in my care, safe from everything that would hurt you. Zara stared out the windows at the city sprawling below, processing the weight of what he was offering. Freedom for security. Independence for protection. Her ordinary life for something that would either save or damn her. But her mother was dying, and this dangerous man was offering salvation at a price she might be able to live with. Yes, she said finally, meeting his dark eyes with as much strength as she could manage. I accept. 2 days later, Taeyun led Zara through the marble corridors of Kim Holdings, his legitimate business empire that controlled half of Seoul's commercial real estate. The building was a monument to power disguised as respectability, all glass and steel, and expensive minimalism that spoke of influence beyond measurement. His private office occupied the entire top floor, with panoramic windows overlooking the Han River and furniture that cost more than most people's homes. Sit, he said, gesturing to a leather chair positioned across from his massive ebony desk. We need to discuss terms. Zara settled into the chair that probably cost more than her monthly teaching salary, studying the man who held her future in his hands. He was wearing another impeccably tailored suit, this one charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, and everything about him radiated controlled authority. Behind him, the city sprawled like a kingdom he owned absolutely. Your mother's treatment requires immediate intervention, Taeyong began, his tone formal and businesslike. $200,000 for the experimental therapy, plus ongoing medical expenses. I will transfer the full amount today, ensure she receives the best oncologists in Seoul, and cover all related costs indefinitely. Zara's breath caught. The sum was staggering, more money than she could earn in 5 years of teaching, delivered with the casual ease of a man for whom such amounts were pocket change. But she had learned enough about dangerous men to know that nothing came without a price. What do you want in return? She asked quietly. Your presence at my side when I conduct business in legitimate circles, he replied with characteristic directness. Charity galas, business dinners, cultural events. You will appear as my companion, providing cover for my operations while enhancing my social standing. You will live under my protection, accept my security arrangements, and maintain absolute discretion about everything you see and hear. The terms were laid out with clinical precision, but Zara heard the deeper implications. She would become his possession in public, his shield of respectability, his beautiful companion who made him appear civilized rather than lethal. You're asking me to be your kept woman, she said, her voice steady despite the way the words tasted bitter. I'm asking you to be under my protection while serving a function that benefits us both, Taeyong corrected. You need resources I can provide. I need legitimacy you can offer. We each have something the other requires. Zara stared out the windows at Seoul's endless sprawl, processing the weight of what he was proposing. Her mother would live. Her debts would vanish. Her safety would be guaranteed by the most dangerous man in the city. But she would belong to him in ways that made her independent spirit recoil. What if I refuse? She asked, though they both knew she could not. Then you return to your teaching job and find another way to save your mother's life in the remaining 2.5 weeks, he said with brutal honesty. And you hope that other men with Yunho's intentions don't notice that you're alone and vulnerable in a city where foreign women disappear regularly. The choice was no choice at all, and he knew it. But Taeyong continued with the same methodical precision that had built his empire. You will maintain complete loyalty and absolute silence about my business operations, he stated. Betrayal of my trust results in immediate termination of all arrangements, including your mother's medical care. You will accept the security protocols I establish without argument. You will behave appropriately in all social situations, representing my interests with dignity and intelligence. And if I agree, she said slowly, what exactly does my life become? You move into a luxury apartment I will provide. You receive a monthly allowance of $50,000 for personal expenses. You are educated in the social requirements of Seoul's elite circles. You attend events as my companion when required, typically 2 to 3 times per week. Your time is otherwise your own, though you remain under protective surveillance at all times. The numbers were staggering. The lifestyle he described was beyond anything she had imagined. But Zara understood that golden cages were still cages, no matter how beautiful the bars. Why me? She asked, needing to understand his motivation. You could have any woman in Seoul for this arrangement. Because most women would either be terrified of who I am or attracted to my power for the wrong reasons. Taeyong replied with unexpected honesty. You've seen my world's darkness and didn't run. You've experienced my protection and didn't try to manipulate it. You're intelligent enough to navigate elite society, beautiful enough to enhance my reputation, and strong enough to handle the moral complexity of our arrangement. Zara weighed his words against everything she knew about survival, about love, about the impossible choices that desperate circumstances created. Her mother was dying. Her bank account was empty. Her safety and soul had been shattered by men who saw her as prey. This dangerous man was offering salvation wrapped in silk and steel. She thought about her mother's smile, about the art therapy sessions she might never teach again, about the dreams that were dying along with the woman who had given her life meaning. She thought about Kim Yunho's predatory hands and how easily she had been drugged and nearly taken. She thought about the careful way Taeyong's people had cared for her while she was unconscious, treating her with respect even in vulnerability. I accept your terms, she said finally, meeting his dark eyes with as much dignity as she could maintain. But I want to be clear that I'm choosing this arrangement, not being forced into it. My consent matters, even in circumstances like these. Something shifted in Taeyong's expression, a flicker of respect that hadn't been there before. Your consent does matter, he agreed, pulling out his phone with the fluid grace that marked all his movements. The transfer for your mother's treatment will complete within the hour. Your apartment will be ready this evening. We begin your integration into Seoul society tomorrow. As he made calls in rapid Korean, arranging her new life with the efficiency of a man accustomed to absolute obedience, Zara stared out at the city that was about to become her kingdom and her prison simultaneously. She was trading her independence for her mother's life, her freedom for security, her ordinary existence for something that would either elevate or destroy her. But for the first time in months, she wasn't carrying the crushing weight of impossible circumstances alone. This dangerous man with his cold eyes and protective instincts had lifted that burden from her shoulders, and she found herself almost grateful for the cage he was building around her. Your education begins now, Taeyong said, ending his calls and focusing his predatory attention entirely on her. There are rules to moving in my world, and your survival depends on learning them quickly. Zara straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze with the strength that had first caught his attention. Then teach me, she said simply. Show me how to be worthy of your protection. The small smile that crossed his features was the first genuine expression she had seen from him, and it promised that her new life would be far more complex than simple arrangement between protector and protected. 3 months after accepting Kim Taeyong's protection, Zara had transformed from desperate teacher into Seoul's most enigmatic socialite. Her mother's treatment was progressing beyond all medical expectations, the experimental therapy working miracles that traditional oncology had deemed impossible. The luxury apartment Taeyong provided overlooked Namsan Park, filled with art and books, and everything she needed to rebuild her sense of self within the golden cage he had constructed around her life. She had proven remarkably adept at navigating Seoul's elite social circles, her natural intelligence and genuine warmth making her invaluable to Taeyong's legitimate business operations. At charity auctions, she charmed potential investors with conversations about art and education. At business dinners, she provided the perfect balance of beauty and substance that made dangerous men appear civilized. She learned to read the subtle power dynamics that governed every interaction, understanding which battles to fight and which to gracefully avoid. But it was the quiet domestic moments that revealed the man beneath the Mafia king's carefully constructed facade. Taeyong would arrive at her apartment after long days of managing his criminal empire, exhaustion evident in the line of his shoulders, and find unexpected peace in sharing simple meals with someone who knew exactly who he was but chose to stay anyway. They talked about books and philosophy, about her art therapy work and his legitimate business strategies, conversations that had nothing to do with power or protection, but everything to do with two intelligent people discovering genuine compatibility. The real test came on a Tuesday evening when rival associates attempted to intimidate Zara during a gallery opening. 3 men approached her while Taeyong was conducting business across the room, their smiles predatory as they suggested that her relationship with Seoul's most dangerous man made her a valuable commodity in ongoing territorial disputes. Your boyfriend's protection only extends so far, one said with obvious menace. Perhaps you should consider more flexible loyalties. Instead of calling for help or showing fear, Zara smiled with the kind of calm confidence that came from understanding exactly how powerful her protector was. I think you're confused about the nature of my relationship with Kim Taeyong, she said quietly. I'm not his weakness. I'm his investment. And he protects his investments with legendary efficiency. The men left quickly after that, recognizing that she was not the frightened girl they had expected, but a woman who understood the game being played around her. When Taeyong heard about the confrontation later, his dark eyes showed something that hadn't been there before. Respect, pride, possessive satisfaction that she had proven worthy of his protection. That night, she found him standing on her apartment's terrace, staring out at the city lights with the weight of secrets heavy on his shoulders. For the first time since she had known him, Kim Taeyong looked vulnerable, like the successful businessman facade had cracked enough to reveal the damaged man beneath. You handled yourself well tonight, he said without turning around. But it concerns me that they approached you directly. It means other organizations are viewing you as leverage against me. Zara joined him at the railing, studying his profile in the soul skyline's glow. "Is that what I am to you?" she asked quietly. "Leverage. You're the first light I've seen in my world in 5 years," he replied with devastating honesty. "And that terrifies me more than any rival faction or territorial war." The admission hung between them like a bridge they could either cross or ignore forever. Zara chose courage, reaching out to touch his hand with fingers that trembled slightly. "Tell me why you're really protecting me," she said. "The truth, not the arrangement we made." Taeyong was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old guilt and fresh pain. "I had a sister," he said slowly. "Kim Soo-young, 3 years younger than me. Everything good in a family that was already steeped in violence and criminality. When I was building my organization, consolidating power, eliminating rivals, she tried to build a normal life. She became a social worker, helping women escape domestic violence, believing she could save people the way no one had saved our family. The wind carried the scent of rain and distant cherry blossoms, but Zara barely noticed anything except the careful way he was revealing pieces of himself that she suspected no one else had ever seen. She met a man who seemed charming, successful, legitimate, Taeyong continued. By the time we realized he was connected to a trafficking operation, it was too late. They took her because they knew it would hurt me, because they understood that in all my power and cruelty, she was the one thing that kept me human. I found her 3 days later. What they had done to her before they killed her was designed to send me a message about the cost of loving anything in our world. Zara's heart clenched with understanding and sympathy for this dangerous man who carried such devastating loss. She began to see how her own near-trafficking had triggered protective instincts rooted in unhealed trauma, how saving her was his chance to save the sister he had failed to protect. "I spent 2 years hunting down everyone involved in her death," he said with quiet finality. "Not just the men who took her, but their families, their associates, their financial backers. I made sure that particular form of evil would never touch my territory again. But it didn't bring her back. It didn't ease the knowledge that I had been too focused on building an empire to notice that my sister needed protection. When I saw you in that bathroom, drugged and helpless, with men who intended to destroy you the same way they destroyed her, something inside me broke and healed simultaneously." Taeyong turned to face her fully, his dark eyes holding hers with intense sincerity. "Protecting you gives my power a purpose beyond mere accumulation. You make me remember that I'm capable of something other than destruction." Zara stepped closer, close enough to see the vulnerability he was trusting her with, close enough to understand that this deadly man was as broken as she was, just in different ways. "You're not responsible for what happened to your sister," she said softly. "But you saved me. You saved my mother. Whatever darkness you carry, it's balanced by the good you've done." Something shifted in his expression, a softening that made him look younger and more human than she had ever seen him. "You see me differently than I see myself," he said, reaching up to touch her face with surprising gentleness. "I see a man who uses his power to protect people who can't protect themselves," she replied. "I see someone who could have taken advantage of my desperation, but instead gave me dignity and choice. I see someone worth caring about, regardless of how dangerous his world is." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and the recognition that their arrangement had evolved into something neither of them had expected. But it was interrupted by the sharp buzz of Taeyong's phone, the sound cutting through the intimacy like a blade. His expression changed instantly, the vulnerability disappearing behind the cold mask of Seoul's most dangerous man as he answered the call. The conversation was brief and conducted in rapid Korean, but Zara didn't need to understand the language to recognize the tension in his voice. "What is it?" she asked when he ended the call. "The Gwangju Syndicate has been conducting surveillance on your mother's hospital and this building for the past week," he said grimly. "They've identified you as my primary vulnerability and are planning to use you as leverage in territorial negotiations." Fear shot through her chest like ice water, but it was tempered by something else. Anger. These people had threatened her mother, had invaded the safe space Taeyong had created, had turned their growing feelings into a weapon to be used against them. "What do we do?" she asked, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "We eliminate the threat permanently," Taeyong replied with lethal certainty. "But first, we ensure your safety and your mother's." The game has changed, Zara. They've declared war by targeting what's mine. As if summoned by his words, Taeyong's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it, and his face went completely still with the kind of rage that preceded systematic destruction. What does it say? Zara asked, though she wasn't certain she wanted to know. A photo of you leaving the hospital yesterday, he said quietly, showing her the screen. With a message that your continued health depends on my willingness to negotiate territorial concessions. The image was clear and professional, taken with telephoto precision that showed she had been watched, studied, targeted without her knowledge. The violation felt like a physical blow, but beneath the fear was something harder and more dangerous. These people had threatened her mother. They had turned her love for Taeyong into a weapon. They had declared war on the two things she cared about most. Then we don't negotiate, she said with quiet determination. We end this completely. Kim Taeyong smiled, and for the first time, it was the expression of a man who had found someone worthy of standing beside him in the darkness rather than someone who needed protection from it. The attack came during her mother's weekly treatment session at Seoul National University Hospital. Zara was sitting beside the chemotherapy chair, reading aloud from her mother's favorite novel, when Taeyong's head of security appeared in the doorway with an expression that made her blood run cold. Miss Williams, we need to leave immediately, he said in accented English, his hand resting on something concealed beneath his jacket. There's been a development. But her mother's treatment wasn't finished, the four still dripping experimental drugs that cost more than most people's annual salary. Zara looked between the security chief and her mother, who had grown stronger over the past 3 months, but was still fragile from the aggressive therapy. What kind of development? She asked, though the tight set of his features already told her everything she needed to know. The kind that requires immediate extraction, he replied, speaking rapidly into his earpiece in Korean before focusing on her again. Mr. Kim's orders are absolute. We move now. The next minutes passed in controlled chaos that spoke of extensive preparation for exactly this scenario. Medical staff appeared with portable equipment to continue her mother's treatment during transport. A wheelchair materialized along with 2 additional security personnel who moved with the fluid precision of former military. Zara found herself surrounded by a protective barrier of armed men as they navigated hospital corridors toward a service elevator she hadn't known existed. In the parking garage, 3 identical black SUVs waited with engines running and windows too dark to see through. As they approached the middle vehicle, gunfire erupted from the hospital's main entrance, the sharp crack of automatic weapons echoing off concrete walls. They're here, the security chief said grimly, helping Zara's mother into the SUV while his men formed a defensive perimeter. The Gwangju syndicate attempted to breach the main floor. Our people are containing them, but this location is compromised. The drive through Seoul's traffic was a nightmare of evasive maneuvers and constant communication between their vehicle and others positioned throughout the city. Zara held her mother's hand while medical equipment beeped reassuringly, but her mind was processing the horrifying reality that people had tried to kidnap them from a hospital, had been willing to risk civilian casualties to get to her. The safe house was a fortress disguised as a luxury compound in Gangnam, surrounded by walls topped with discreet security measures and guards who looked like they could handle military assault. Inside, everything was white and sterile and designed for extended siege, with medical facilities that rivaled the hospital and communications equipment that connected to networks she didn't want to understand. Your mother will be comfortable here, Taeyong said when he arrived an hour later, still wearing the business suit from whatever legitimate meeting the crisis had interrupted. The medical staff is the best in Asia, completely loyal and fully equipped to continue her treatment regardless of external circumstances. But Zara barely heard him, her mind still reeling from the gunfire and the realization that loving this man had made her family a target for people who killed without hesitation. She stared at the surveillance monitors showing the compound's perimeter, understanding with crystal clarity that she was now living in a bunker because her presence in Kim Taeyong's life had started a war. How many people are going to die because of me? She asked quietly. None who don't deserve it, he replied with the cold certainty that had built his empire. The Gwangju syndicate declared war when they threatened what belongs to me. They chose violence when they could have chosen negotiation. Now they face the consequences of that choice. She turned to study his face, seeing the predatory stillness that meant he was planning systematic destruction. This was Kim Tae-young, the Mafia king, not the man who brought her coffee in the morning or discussed philosophy on her terrace. This was the person who had built Seoul's most feared criminal organization through methodical brutality. "What are you going to do?" she asked, though she wasn't certain she wanted to know the answer. "End this permanently," he said, pulling out his phone to make calls in rapid Korean that sounded like military commands. "The syndicate has 36 hours to withdraw from Seoul entirely or face complete annihilation. Their leadership, their operations, their financial networks, their families. Everything they built, everything they are, erased from existence." Zara felt something cold settle in her stomach as she watched him coordinate what was essentially a declaration of war. Men responded to his orders with the instant obedience of soldiers who had seen him win impossible battles through superior planning and absolute ruthlessness. This was the price of his protection, she realized. Total destruction of anyone who threatened what he claimed as his. Over the next 24 hours, she watched him transform their safe house into a command center for systematic warfare. Maps of Seoul appeared marked with territories and strongholds. Financial records were analyzed to identify weak points in the syndicate's operations. Intelligence flowed in from sources throughout the city as Tae-young's network gathered information with frightening efficiency. The elimination began at dawn on the second day with coordinated strikes across 12 locations simultaneously. Zara didn't see the violence directly, but she felt it in the tension that radiated from every security guard, heard it in the clipped reports that came through encrypted communications, saw it in the way Tae-young's expression grew colder and more distant with each confirmed success. By evening, the Gwangju syndicate had ceased to exist. Their leadership was dead, their operations dismantled, their financial assets seized or destroyed. The threat that had forced them into hiding had been eliminated with the kind of thoroughness that would serve as warning to anyone else who considered targeting Kim Tae-young's interests. When he returned to their safe house that night, there was something different about him. Blood metaphorically stained his hands. Violence clung to his expensive clothes like smoke, and the weight of what he had ordered pressed against his shoulders. He had orchestrated the destruction of dozens of lives to protect hers, had chosen her safety over any moral consideration about proportional response. "It's done," he said simply, his voice carrying exhaustion and something darker. "The threat is eliminated completely. You and your mother are safe." Zara studied his face, seeing the cost that systematic brutality had extracted from him, understanding that he had crossed lines that could never be uncrossed to ensure her protection. This was who Kim Tae-young was beneath the business suits and charitable donations. This was the darkness she would have to accept if she chose to stay in his world. "How many people died today?" she asked quietly. 43 members of the syndicate and their immediate associates, he replied with brutal honesty. "None of whom were innocent, all of whom chose their fate when they threatened you." She should have been horrified. She should have been repulsed by the casual way he discussed mass murder. She should have demanded he take her away from this compound, and this life, and this man who killed for her without hesitation. Instead, she crossed the room and took his hands in hers, feeling the slight tremor that spoke of violence recently committed, seeing the vulnerability beneath the lethal competence. "Thank you," she said simply, the words carrying weight that surprised them both. "For protecting my mother. For keeping us safe. For doing what needed to be done." Kim Tae-young's dark eyes searched her face, looking for horror or judgment or fear, finding instead acceptance and understanding and something deeper that looked like love despite everything she now knew about his capacity for destruction. "You're not afraid of me," he said, wonder in his voice. "I'm terrified of you," she replied honestly. "But I'm more terrified of a world where you don't exist to protect the people you love. You're a monster, Kim Tae-young. But you're my monster, and I choose that darkness willingly." Something shifted in his expression then, relief and gratitude and possessive satisfaction combining into an emotion too complex to name. He pulled her closer, and she felt the tremor in his hands fade as her acceptance absorbed the weight of what he had done in her name. In the quiet hours after Seoul's underworld had been reshaped by systematic violence, Zara found Kim Tae-young standing on the safe house terrace, staring out at the city lights with the weight of 43 deaths on his shoulders. The night air carried the scent of rain and distant cherry blossoms, but she could smell something else clinging to him. The metallic scent of finality. The invisible stain of choices that could never be undone. He had showered and changed into simple black clothes, but nothing could wash away what he had orchestrated in her name. For the first time since she had known him, Seoul's most feared Mafia king looked fragile, like the cost of protecting her had extracted something essential from his soul. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly, joining him at the railing. "I regret that it was necessary," he replied without turning around. "I regret that loving you made you a target. I regret that my world requires such brutal solutions to preserve anything beautiful." "But not the choice itself," she observed. "Never the choice itself," he confirmed, finally facing her with eyes that held exhaustion and something deeper. "I would burn down half of Seoul to keep you safe. I would destroy anyone who threatened what we have. And that terrifies me more than any rival faction or territorial war." Zara studied his face in the city's glow, seeing the vulnerability beneath the lethal competence, understanding that this dangerous man was as afraid of losing her as she was of losing him. The violence was over. The threats were eliminated. But now they had to decide what they were to each other without the pressure of immediate danger. "Why does it terrify you?" she asked, reaching out to touch his hand. "Because you make me human," he said with devastating honesty. "Before you, I was efficient violence wrapped in expensive suits. I made decisions based on power and profit and strategic advantage. But you changed that. You gave my darkness a purpose beyond mere accumulation of control. And if I lose you, I lose the only thing that keeps me from becoming the monster everyone believes I already am." The admission hung between them like a bridge she could either cross or retreat from forever. Zara chose courage, stepping closer until she could see the vulnerability he was trusting her with, until she could feel the tremor in his hands that spoke of fear more profound than any physical threat. "You're not losing me," she said firmly. "I'm not leaving, not running, not letting fear make my choices. But I need you to understand something. I'm not staying because I'm grateful or because I need your protection or because I have nowhere else to go." "Then why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because I love you," she said simply, the words carrying weight that surprised them both. "Not the man who saved me, not the provider who protects me, but you. The person who brings me coffee in the morning and discusses philosophy at midnight. The man who carries pictures of his dead sister and uses violence to protect things too beautiful for this world to touch. I love all of you, Kim Tae-young. Light and shadow, tenderness and brutality, everything that makes you who you are." Something shifted in his expression then, relief and wonder and possessive satisfaction combining into an emotion too complex to name. He cupped her face in hands that had ordered destruction but touched her with infinite gentleness. "You're mine," he said, the words carrying absolute conviction. "Completely and forever. Not because of arrangements or protection or mutual benefit, but because you choose to be. Because you see who I am and stay anyway. Because you understand that loving me means accepting darkness as the price of light." "I'm yours," she agreed, and the words felt like a vow that bound them more completely than any legal document. "And you're mine, broken pieces and all. Forever." The kiss that followed was desperate and tender and claiming all at once, sealing promises that went deeper than mere protection or arrangement. When he lifted her into his arms and carried her inside, it felt like the completion of something that had begun the moment their eyes met across that ballroom 3 months ago. Their physical connection was everything the emotional one had promised. Passionate and tender, possessive and reverent. The joining of two people who understood exactly what they meant to each other and chose that meaning despite its cost. In the luxury of silk sheets and city lights, they claimed each other completely. No barriers left between them, no pretense of mere arrangement. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the aftermath of intimacy, Taeyong traced patterns on her skin with fingers that trembled slightly. "Marry me," he said suddenly, the words carrying the weight of official declaration. "Not for convenience or protection or business advantage. Marry me because you love me and I love you and I want the world to know that you are my equal, my partner, my queen." The proposal was characteristically direct, no elaborate gestures or romantic settings, just the simple truth of what he wanted from their future. Zara turned in his arms to study his face, seeing sincerity and hope and vulnerability in his dark eyes. "Yes," she said simply, and watched his expression transform into something radiant and possessive and deeply satisfied. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll be your partner in whatever comes next. Yes, I choose this life and this love and this man who would burn down the world to keep me safe." The wedding happened 2 weeks later in a private ceremony that was attended by Seoul's most powerful figures and protected by enough security to guard a head of state. Zara walked down the aisle in silk and diamonds that cost more than most people's homes, but it was the expression in Taeyong's eyes that made her feel truly precious. Love and pride and possessive satisfaction that spoke of a man who had found something worth more than all his accumulated power. Her mother, healthy enough to attend thanks to the experimental treatment that had worked beyond all medical expectation, cried tears of joy as she watched her daughter marry the dangerous man who had saved both their lives through sheer force of will and unlimited resources. 6 months later, they returned to the Shilla Hotel for the same charity gala where they had first met. But everything was different now. Zara entered not as a desperate catering worker, but as Kim Taeyong's wife, Seoul's most feared and respected queen, a woman whose very presence spoke of power that could not be touched or threatened. The ballroom sparkled with the same crystal and gold that had dazzled her months before, but now she moved through the crowd as an equal to the wealthiest elite, her natural intelligence and genuine warmth making her invaluable to their legitimate business empire. She wore a gown that cost more than her old annual salary and jewelry that could fund small countries, but it was the wedding ring on her finger that truly marked her transformation. Kim Taeyong watched her navigate the crowd with the same predatory intensity that had first marked her as his, but now there was something else in his dark eyes. Pride in her capabilities, satisfaction in her adaptation, love that went deeper than possession or protection. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked when they found themselves alone on the same terrace where she had once collapsed from being drugged. "Your old life, your independence, your freedom to make choices without considering their impact on Seoul's criminal landscape." Zara considered the question seriously, remembering the exhaustion and desperation that had marked her previous existence, the crushing weight of circumstances beyond her control, the terror of being helpless in a world that preyed on vulnerable women. "I miss the simplicity sometimes," she admitted, "but I don't miss the powerlessness. I don't miss watching my mother die while counting dollars I didn't have. I don't miss being prey in a world full of predators." "And now?" he asked with the small smile that was reserved only for her. "Now I'm married to the apex predator," she replied, turning to face him fully. "Now I have the power to protect other women the way you protected me. Now I can use resources I never dreamed of having to make sure other mothers get experimental treatments and other daughters don't face impossible choices alone." Through their charitable foundation, they had begun funding programs for vulnerable women throughout Asia, providing protection and resources and opportunities for those trapped by circumstances beyond their control. It was Zara's way of transforming the darkness of Taeyong's world into something that served light, using criminal profits to save lives that the legitimate world ignored. "You've made me better than I was," he said, pulling her closer as Seoul's lights sparkled below them like a kingdom they ruled together. "You've given my power a purpose beyond mere accumulation. You've given me the strength to save people the way you saved me," she replied, reaching up to touch his face with fingers that wore diamonds worth more than some country's GDP, but still trembled slightly when they touched him. "We make each other whole." As they stood together on the terrace where their story had truly begun, surrounded by the wealth and power and security that their love had created, Kim Taeyong whispered the words that had become their private truth. "You're mine, completely and forever." "And you're mine," Zara replied, the words carrying the weight of choice and love and acceptance that had transformed two broken people into something stronger than either could have been alone. In Seoul's glittering skyline, their empire stretched in all directions, built on blood and violence, and the simple truth that some loves were worth any price, any darkness, any cost. She had walked into danger as a desperate woman trying to save her mother's life. She stood now as a queen who could save anyone she chose, protected absolutely by the most dangerous man in Asia, loved completely by someone who would destroy the world rather than lose her. Their happily ever after was written in power and blood, and the kind of devotion that transformed monsters into men and ordinary women into queens. Forever mine, forever his, forever choosing love despite its terrible beautiful cost.